Dzień dobry. My name is Sergey Morenets, and I came from Odessa, Ukraine, to talk about Angular and Angular best practices. But before we start, let me make a quick poll. Please raise your hand if you use Angular in your projects. Okay, almost half. And please raise your hand if you use Angular, but you don't like Angular. Okay, no one. Yes, I think you just didn't hear my question. Okay. So let me introduce myself. I am a Java developer, almost 14 years, and the last 5 years I use Angular, AngularJS or Angular 1, and then Angular 2 and other versions. I am trainer. I am a technical writer. I wrote 4 books that is available at my site, IT Simulator. I love participation in the conferences. It's my second participation. And I represent the educational courses called IT Discovery, where we organized trainings, workshops, seminars, webinars about front-end technologies, and namely Angular. And we have a lot of arguments about the Angular, and because some people like it, some people hate it, seriously. And I knew a person that was almost crying that he migrated his project from pure JavaScript to Angular. And why almost crying and not crying? Because after migration, his salary was 3 times bigger. So, front-end. I like the fact that front-end is growing very fast, and even faster than backend. That's what I like it. And if you look at the result of the Stack Overflow survey that was done this year, you can notice that almost half of the participants of this survey are full-stack developer. Yes. But full-stack developer is something different because you can migrate from backend to full-stack development of front-end. And the perception of the Angular and other frameworks is very different. And I will show today the best practices and common traps you can hit with Angular. But let's return back. 2014, it was like 2 years when I used AngularJS in my project. And I remember the day when Angular 2 was coming, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. And I call it great expectations. But people just started thinking, oh, AngularJS was amazing, and Angular 2 would be much better. But reality was not so simple. Why is that? First of all, it's relative complexity. It was a framework, and people had to learn a lot. First of all, it's not only Angular API, also TypeScript, and other stuff, yes. And some people told me that it requires 2 weeks to learn Vue.js from scratch till the production, yes. In Angular is much slower. Also, the performance problems, yes. You know that Angular 2, people from Angular team did a great job improving performance, but it was not so desired. For example, if you have AngularJS, then AngularJS minify script is about 170 kilobytes. And in Angular 2, the size of the minified and compiled Hello World application is about 300,000 of bytes. Yeah? And for realistic application, it's 1 megabyte. In our case, like 2 or 3 megabytes. So that was the reason that people started migrating to more lightweight technologies like React, Vue.js, Aurelia. And you can find in internet a lot of articles how I migrated from Vue.js, from Angular to Vue.js or React. And not so many articles how I migrated from React to Angular. So in this talk, I would like to expose our best practices, and I think it's not like ultimate best practices, but I think it will be useful, and you will avoid any errors that we hit. Angular CLI, Angular Command Line Interface, is very useful because it allows you to automate common tasks. I know there are developers who use Webpack directly or System.js, but I highly recommend to use Angular CLI because it allows you to do the most common tasks. It's build, run, and test your project. Yes. Also, you can generate any piece of the project just running command and get generate, like a component service or other stuff. And it also generates the unit tests and the style sheets. Yes, and in Angular 6, we have 2 new commands. It's ng-add that adds a new dependency without using npm, and ng-update that updates your project, all the dependencies to the latest version. That's very cool. I think you know that in Angular, you can use 4 languages to write their projects. It's Dart, it's JavaScript, it's ECMAScript 6, it's TypeScript. And I highly recommend to use TypeScript. Why is that? First of all, JavaScript was the main reason that I don't like front-end, and for 10 years, the front-end was like a dark matter for me. I tried to avoid it because JavaScript was popular, but this was dynamic typing, and you can encounter a lot of unpleasant errors. And if you look at the Stack Overflow survey results this year, you can see that the TypeScript is on the 4th place of all most loved programming, script, and markup language. And it's very cool. So let's talk about TypeScript features. So first of all, I think you know that TypeScript is statically typing, so you can create your types and declare types. You can also use object-oriented paradigms in your application. And what I especially like TypeScript is very fastly growing. Yes, so every 2 or 3 months, you have a new version and new exciting features. So let's say you're migrating your JavaScript application to TypeScript. Yes, and you started writing your types, classes, and that's how your class will look. Yes, TypeScript allows that. You declare a class with 2 properties without type. That's OK. Then you can specify any type. That means you understand the risk, yes, that there is no statically typing. But you say, OK, I will declare my type later. And here is a fully compatible TypeScript class. Yes, you see the interesting feature that you can declare a property of different types. Like you say, OK, sometimes I initialize my age to string, sometimes a number. So I can declare this type here. JavaScript, the function calculate. I think that no one of you guess what is value, what is func, and so on, and what is this function returns. And in TypeScript, like in Java language, we can specify the type not only for the parameters of the function, but only the function. This is also parameter and the return type. That's very cool. Type aliases. For example, we have a class, let's say person, that is class in the core of Angular, or the class from any libraries that you use, and you can change it. Yes, you should use it, but you can change it. But the issue is that the name is not so meaningful for you, and you want to rename it. Yes, how we do in the Java language? I think we can extend this class or any stuff, or use composition. In TypeScript, we can create an alias. We can say, OK, I declare a new type, it's employee, and I want that employee and person will be interchangeable types. So anytime I declare a variable of type person, I can assign a variable of type employee. Yeah, it's also very cool. It adds flexibility to your project. Generic types. Generic types was introduced in Java 5, and it was one of the best features that I've seen in this version. And generic types also supported in Angular, in TypeScript. So you can declare like items, and not a simple array, but it's an array, or the generic type is string. So you can add only the string elements to these items. And if you work with these variable items, you can use it like the new TypeScript syntax, like new array, or old JavaScript syntax, like a square brackets. That's also very good. And what is more powerful with generics is that you can declare your boundaries for generic types. Yes. For example, we have a storage item, and we have a class storage, and we can say, okay, my function save accepts any type that extends storage item. And if you remove the export keyword here, yes, so it is a pure Java code. Yes, I think you cannot differ, is it Java or not. And that's one of the reasons that if you are a Java developer, it's very easy for you to migrate to TypeScript. Optional properties. Let's say you have class product, and for example, 3 properties. And you want to instantiate it. How can you do it? You can try Java-like syntax. Yes, you create an object of class product and initialize property one by one. But you can also use the JavaScript syntax. Then you can declare object, and you have to specify every property that exists in the product class. But the small issue here is that you have to pass any property, even if it's null. Yes, for example, discount date is null, so we don't have to initialize it. But TypeScript compiler forces us to do that. What can we do? We can add the question mark to the discount date property, yes, and that makes discount date optional. So now you have to specify only the required properties. That's not a big deal if you have 3 properties, but if it's 50 or 100, it's a very big decrease in the code. Enumerations. Enumerations also appeared in Java 5, and we have enumerations in TypeScript as well. I think you know that TypeScript code will transpile to JavaScript when we build the application, because modern browsers doesn't understand TypeScript or any other language. So what will happen when this code will compile? It will compile it into the object where each key, winter, spring, summer, autumn, will be compiled, converted to some value. Yes, you can specify this value explicitly, or if not, that will be assigned by TypeScript compiler. And what was not so good, that TypeScript didn't support the strings. Yes, you can only assign the numbers. And in TypeScript 2.4, finally, you have possibility to assign strings to the enumeration constant. It's very useful because now you have a fully useful enumeration. When we started learning TypeScript and Angular, the most complicated part was to explain front-end developers what is interface. Yes, they could understand what is class, but what interface it was not so easy to them. And if we have TypeScript and we have some data classes, what means data classes is a class that you use to transfer data between your backend and frontend, say user. And you can use interface and you can use class. Yes, it's almost similar. Yes, so this is a simple little object, no functionality, no behavior, just properties. And what should you choose? Yes, but interesting question. So we started using classes, yes, because we know that interface is API, is contract, so we don't have to use it for the data transferring. But then, after reading some guides and so on, we understand that interface is more suitable here. One of the reasons is that interface doesn't exist in the JavaScript. So any code that involves Java interfaces will be automatically removed. So this is performance improvement. Yes. So I would recommend to use interfaces. And interface you can instantiate like we instantiated the classes. You can declare a variable of type person and just enumerate all the properties of this interface. However, that raised an interesting question. Let's say you have a backend project, and in this project you have a class person. This person is some entity or DTO, and you send these items, persons, from backend to frontend. And you want also to have the type person on your frontend. But if you have, say, 50 or 100 classes, you have to manually write and maintain the person interface on your frontend. To avoid that, there is a very useful plugin called TypeScript Generator. It has support for the Maven and for the Gradle. And what should you do? You add this plugin to your project. You have to specify the JSON library. It's almost always JSON. You have to specify the classes or class. This is a package for your DTOs. And the output file. And when you build your project, the single file called sample.dts, it's a TypeScript file, will be generated. And it will contain all the DTOs for your project. So it's very useful because you don't have to manually write these DTOs in your application. When we have seminars and webinars concerning Angular, there were a lot of battles about what should we use, observable or promise. I think you know that in AngularJS there was a promise, and I tended to use promise. But in Angular 2, we have an observable. It's implementation of the ReactiveX specification. And the interesting question is, what should you do? If you're a front-end developer, that's what is the most common scenario, is that you return observable. I think it's observable return for some HTTP request, and then convert to the promise and bucket promise. After the lot of battles, so here our conclusion. If you have some asynchronous operation, it's very, very simple and have two states, like a succeed or fail, then you should use promise. If you have some streaming operation, like you take data from some external source, like HTTP service, then I would recommend you to use observable, because it supports a rich syntax, a lot of filter conversion operation, and it allows you to avoid the boilerplate code if you use promise. But there is one small issue with observable. Yes, let's take this component. This component has a property called subject. It's behavioral subject from the React.js, and it injects app service to subscribe to it and initialize the subject. Yes. So if you see the function getValue, the getValue just returns the latest value that we receive from the API app service. That's cool, but I think you could run into an issue in this code because your component just cannot be unloaded. Why is that? Because the app service has a subscriber, the subject, and the Angular can't just unload this code, this component. What have you do? You should add the subscription. Subscription is a result of some subscribe operations. Yes, in the callback called ng-on-destroy. ng-on-destroy is called when you unload the component, Angular unload the component. You just call unsubscribe. Yes, and after this change, your code will be just safer, and the component can be unloaded. Services. I think you agree with me that dependency injection is one of the coolest features in AngularJS or Angular 2, because it allows us to delegate the instantiation and linking of our objects to the framework, to Angular. And let's say we have an app service. It's a very simple service. We have a function called getTypes. And we want to use it to inject it in other components. And let's say we have this app component, we inject it, and we know there is a dependency injection, but if there is only code that we have an error message. Why is that? Because we didn't specify that app service provider. And for me, it was not meaningful. And in Angular 6, you have a new attribute called provided in. And if you add this attribute to the injectable decorator, then this service will be automatically registered as a provider. It's a cool feature that you should use for your projects. Another sample of dependency injection. Let's say this is an example from our project. It's a data component, and it has a service called Active Model. Active Model is a service from Bootstrap. Yes, and I think that's a very good example of the correct, nice, cute dependency injection. But the reality is not so simple, and you know that the bad code is like a cancer tumor. It always grows. And you see that there is 7 services, and the number of services can grow, and that makes your code unreadable and hard to maintain and understand. So what should I recommend you? I would recommend that you have no more than 3 parameters for dependency injection. If you have more, what should you do? You just split your component into the subcomponents. Yes? And that makes your components not only more readable, but also more reusable. Reusability. Let's say you have a app component, you have a title property, and you have a function called surround. It's a very simple function that just adds these special characters to the text. This function doesn't access the component properties, and I think that in Java, it would be a good candidate for the static function. Yes, because it doesn't use any of the class fields. It's some utility class. And if you use some IDE like WebStorm that supports linting, then you can you have a hint that method can be static. Okay, let's make it static. And after that, you will have an exception. And why is that? Because the Angular doesn't support static methods in your templates. Yeah, so what can you do? And especially, what can you do if you want to share the surround function across all the applications? So not only the app component, but also in other components. So the ideal choice here is pipes. Why is that? Because pipes can be shared across all the projects. And here, you can call it like surround pipe, implements the pipe transform interface, and just declare your transform function. And now, you can very easily to apply this pipe. And what is good here, that you can apply the functional style programming. You can add more and more pipes. Yes, so the code will be much easier to implement. I think you know the person called John Papa that created a style guide for Angular, and I highly recommend to read it like 3 or more times, because it contains a lot of useful comments and examples how you should write Angular. Angular's framework, it's not easy to take it from scratch and write very fast, good application. So several useful examples from this guide. For example, you have also app component, and you have a property and some function. And this code is absolutely correct from the TypeScript point of view. But what I recommend you to always make a safe variables. For example, if you have a property in the component that never changed, so I recommend to use the read-only modifier. And if there is a local variable in your function, it's never changed, I recommend to use a const variable. That also makes your code very safe. Working with templates. For example, this is code from the Angular. And in this code, we have a very simple template, the div with some identifier. And when our component gets rendered, then we change the text in this div. And this code works, but it's not safe, absolutely not safe. But it's very common in JavaScript projects. So I highly recommend to use, for example, the temporary variables and the element ref. Element ref is abstraction over the element, HTML element in your DOM structure. So this code is more safe. But the most safe option is this one. So you inject the renderer 2. Renderer 2 is abstraction of the rendering capabilities in Angular. And then you can use methods like setProperty, setAttribute to change any part of your elements. This code is also more appropriate if you have Angular universal, because it will not work. The second option will not work in Angular Universal. Another example. Let's say you have the order component, and it's a very simple template. They have a ngIf directive that just renders this div element if the show data is true. Yes, and show data is false, it's not rendered. But as I said, the bad code grows and grows, and you can encounter the second option, that a lot of conditions. And if this trivial example, that's okay. But in the complex example, you have the very, very unreadable code because the path will be very big. So what I recommend you, if you have some presentation logic, so please move it to the component, not put it into the template, because when you compose logic and template, that's make your code no easy for notice. Modularization. I think you agree that modularization is a fundamental and core aspect of every technology. Let's say we have an application, a project, where we use Angular material. Yes. Please raise your hand if you use Angular material. 2. Yes. So you see that the guys from Angular material team did a great job because they didn't create a monolith from this library, material 2, and instead, every component is a module, and you export only the necessary modules. Yes, so very good. But when you start working with Angular, so you have a questions. Where should I store my classes, my services, my components, directive pipes, and authentication layer? I think that you know this picture. It's very popular, and it's just describe the basic concepts. You should have a core module, a feature module for each feature, and a shard feature module. But it doesn't explain the much deeper details for realistic application. So what should I recommend for you from our experience? If you have some lightweight pipes, directive components, what I mean lightweight, it doesn't use any services. Yes, so please put into the shard module. This module will be imported by any other modules. If you have data classes or interfaces, I recommend add it to the domain module. If you have some features, and what is feature? Feature is some visualization like component. As any services related to it, I would recommend to put into the feature modules. Like if you have 5 features, you have 5 feature modules. And if you have some global services, the global services like for authentication, authorization, I would recommend put into the core module. And core module will be imported only once in the root module. Libraries. In 2004, I worked on a project that had no libraries. Yes, it's a Java project. But time changed, and I think in your projects you have 10, 20, 50, or even more libraries. Why is that? Because library is a trusted and tested piece of code. You don't have to implement it yourself. And for Angular, it's the same. You have to choose a lot of libraries, but there is one small issue and difference between Java and Angular. Why is that? Because in Java, libraries and frameworks are developed by the big vendors. Yes, big vendors, but not only develop, document, test, and maintain the code, yes, but also ship it. In Angular, what we have is that libraries is also work of single developers. And the single developer can just stop supporting your project. It's very simple. Not even they implement new features and pull requests, but also fixing the bugs, the critical bugs. And if you build your projects, you can see that a lot of warnings that some of the libraries just don't support the new version of Angular. And you can see a lot of issues on the GitHub, on where the libraries reside, that please upgrade our project. And we have a very sad story in our project where we have to migrate a very big piece of functionality from one library to another library because it just stopped updating and implementing. So I would recommend you, if you want to select some library, always check who is author of this library. So how long will support it? Do you have some end of life and so on? Because otherwise, you will have a lot of problems trying to fix the issues yourself. And if you have some trivial functionality you want to export from the libraries, I also recommend you to implement it yourself, if it's trivial, because it will allow you to learn Angular and TypeScript. What should you use for UI? Yes. There are two good candidates, is Angular Material and Prime Faces. I think you are aware of these libraries. The Angular Material is a Google implementation of the material design, and it's actively growing, so we use it in our administration application. But there is also a custom solution called Prime Faces. It has implementation for the Java. It's called Prime Faces for the React and for Angular. And why it can be better? Because it has a lot of components, more than 70. It supports theming and templates and also responsive design out of the box. So it's also very cool. And a new player on this market is the Project Clarity. Project Clarity is a project developed by VMware company that's rather new. And you see on this screen that features are added and added to the project. And what is interesting in this library, that it not also introduced the components, but also the layout of your application. Yes. So when you develop your UI, you just need to select the layout, and it will be automatically rendered by the Clarity. Performance. Performance is something that you should fight for, and is not what you get for free. What should you use to build your project and to install dependencies? So in 2014, we used Bower. It was pretty cool. Then we migrated to NPM and used it like 3 or maybe 2 years. But then I found an article in web where author said that Yarn is a rather new package manager, is much faster. And you can see the benchmark. So it was interesting to me, and I performed our own benchmarks. I compared NPM 5.6 and Yarn 1.5, and that's correct. Yarn is much faster, maybe 2 or 5 times faster. Why is that? Because it uses parallel execution that fetch in the libraries and another type of the cache. So what I recommend you to switch to Yarn if you want to faster gather your projects. Change detection. Change detection is something that was changed in Angular 2, and it will improve performance. And what I can recommend you is that if you have some component that is reusable in your application, and the component depends only on the input variables, for example, this is a language component, and we have a label property, and this is input, so we can pass from the root component, that if we change the change detection from default to on push, then if the input variables haven't changed, that this language component will not be rendered. That's very useful because most of the components relies only on the input variables. And in this case, we can avoid like some of the branches, because if we mark the change detection as on push and the variable haven't changed, this component and all the child components will not be rendered. Manual change detection is not something that we apply very useful, but it can be sometimes useful if, for example, you have some external API, external storage, that just started pushing data to you. And if you render it each time, like every 5 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, it will dramatically impact on your page. What can we do? That can we manually inject the object called change detector ref. Then we detach. So it means that change detection will be disabled, and when each 5 seconds by the timer will reattach it and invoke the detection change again. So that will improve your performance. Memory leaks. Memory leaks is not something rare in Angular applications, and people complaining about that. So how can we improve it? For example, you have a cycle, you have a books, it's a array or collection, and you iterate over this collection of books, and for each item, iteration item, you generate an app book component. But what is the problem here? If there is a small number of books, like 2 or 3, that's okay. If you have a 50 of books, that means that each time our page is re-rendered, the Angular re-rendered all their app book components. Why is that? Because it couldn't identify if book have changed or not after the rendering, because book is object, it's not primitive type. How can we improve that? We can add the track by parameter to the ng4 directive and add the function called trackbook. What is trackbook? Trackbook is a function that accepts the our iteration parameter like book and returns the key value of the book. For example, if the book identifier like is ID, that will return book.id. And after that, then Angular will try to understand if the book's content have changed or not. It can change the ID of the book. If ID doesn't change, that we don't need to render all this page. Another interesting example. Let's say you have also books component. It has a collection of books, books is object, and you have a function called getStatus that accepts book and checks the book's sold property, and if book sold, it returns text sold out. If not, it just returns in stock. And let's say you have a template. Yes, it's also used in G4 directive, and that displays the book ID, book name, and book status, but is a call to the function. And let's say you rendered your page, and then you change something in the input box. How do you think, if you have 50 of books, how many times the getStatus function will be called? Yes, if it's production, 50 is development 100, because in development environment, we have 2 cycles of change detection. Yeah, so that's a very big impact on performance. So how can we improve that? Again, pipes. We can create a new pipe called status pipe and override transform value. And this pipe accepts Boolean and returns string, sold or not sold. And why it's better? Because Angular can cache pipes responses. You can check the input parameters. If it doesn't change, it will not call your pipes. So that's also very good impact on performance. And you can see that we can change function to the pipe. If you have a SPA application, and I think that a SPA application is a very good reason to use Angular, that I would recommend you to use lazy loading. Why is that? If you have, let's say, 20 modules, and your modules are not lazy loaded, it will be automatically fetch and start up, and it will decrease performance. So what can you do? You can add there, instead of explicitly loading modules, add the construction load children, specify their modules, and then what happens? Angular will try to load the core module and other modules on demand. That can be a problem because when you access some module, Angular will try to fetch it. So what can you do? You can add a prefetch strategy, and what changed? Angular will try to load the main module, and then in the background, it fetches all the lazy load modules. It also improves your performance. Angular Universal. Sometimes you have 2 issues in your application. First of all, your pages are rendered very slowly because it has a lot of calls to some API service. And also, your pages are not supported by SEO engines because it's JavaScript, and JavaScript is not correctly identified by SEO. What can you do? You can convert your application into universal. Yes, it's very simple using the Angular CLI. And then you will have a server-side rendering. So your page will be rendered on the server and get to the browser as a pure HTML. But it's not so simple. Why is that? Because currently only two engines support universal. First is Node.js, second is ASP.NET. And there is also an issue to support other not Node.js engines, including Java, because in Java we have two engines, it's Rhino and Neshorn, that don't support the Node.js API. So we have to use some custom API to integrate this Angular Universal. But things are changing. And a month ago, there was a new proposal to change Angular Universal to use so-called socket engine. If it will implement it, that it will be much easier to add support of any framework or any engine to support this universal. Service workers. Service workers is a feature available in browsers. In Angular 5, we have support of service worker. So why it's useful? Because it allows you to cache the responses of other APIs or your files. And if you have some problems with your servers, you can work offline, like, for example, like Google Gmail and so on. So I also recommend you to use it. Jest. I think that if you use Angular, that you use Jasmine and Karma for unit test, yes? But what I can recommend you is to switch to Jest, or even maybe just research the Jest. Why is that? Jest is a unit test library that was designed in the Facebook team. It is used in React. And why is better? First of all, it's faster. It's used parallel execution, and it uses the so-called JS DOM. This is a virtual DOM environment. Yeah, so also, it built on top of Jasmine. That means you don't need to change your unit test. Yeah, so you have just use your existing test like you use for the Jasmine. It has so many features that it's not possible to explain in the single slide, but I will recommend it. Please raise your hand if you heard about Angular Ivy renderer. No one? Okay. Angular Ivy renderer is a renderer that will be supposed to be introduced in Angular 6. And why is so important for us? Because it will dramatically reduce the build time of our project and the size of our generated JavaScript code. So, for example, the authors of this renderer told that Hello World application built with Ivy renderer will be about 3 or 4 kilobytes. Yes, you have a sample on the page. But the problem is that it's very hard to predict when it will be ready. For example, there is a special site, then you can track the status of this renderer. Yes, and you can see that the renderer is ready about 63%. But there is no release date, and if I am manager or architect, I cannot predict it. And if I try to ask the authors of this renderer when it's ready, I get interesting answer. Yeah, so welcome to open source. And if you try to analyze and predict also the Angular release date, it's not possible because the roadmap, it's an old page, it's not so correct. And I know the examples that it was behind the date like 6 or 7 months. In Angular 7, we have a different page that's a bit natural because they don't specify the exact date, like 2 months, about that. And let's briefly summarize my talk. So if you are backend developers, then Angular can be a framework of your dream because you can practice your object-oriented and design skills. If you're a front-end developer, then Angular is the perfect choice to improve your design and architecture skills that is not available to implement or improve in your usual front-end projects. And if you want something very simple, if your application is very simple, and if you need technology that is very easy to learn, I think that Angular is not what you want. But if you need some robust and enterprise solution, that I think that Angular is your ideal choice. That's all for me. If you have questions, I will be glad to answer them.